Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped into the hearing room expecting a viral victory, completely unaware that Senator John Kennedy was holding the exact evidence to dismantle her entire career. The most efficient way to break down a nation is not with an invading army. It is with a safety net woven from the effort and sweat of the American taxpayer. They call it compassion. But in the dark corners of the political establishment, compassion is a commodity traded for illicit favors. Welcome to the ultimate arena, where today Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez thought she could bury a Louisiana legend under a mountain of trendy buzzwords. She forgot that while her followers are counting likes, Senator John Kennedy is counting the receipts of their questionable actions. The Senate Judiciary Committee hearing room was a pressure cooker, packed with media observers waiting for a viral moment to take down another Southern conservative. AOC sat at the high bench, her designer glasses reflecting the worshipful flicker of 100 cameras. She twirled a gold-nibbed fountain pen with the practiced arrogance of a revolutionary who has never missed a hair appointment. Across from her, Senator Kennedy looked like a man who had wandered in from a Sunday porch, slowly leafing through a battered stack of documents. Senator Kennedy, I truly hope we are not going to spend this afternoon indulging in your usual brand of rural anecdotes while families are going hungry in our streets. She leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with the kind of coastal condescension that makes a working citizen's skin crawl. The American people are tired of the obstruction and the subtle signals you call oversight. We are here to discuss a massive expansion of the social safety net. It is a lifeline for the very communities you have spent your career ignoring. Every minute you spend grandstanding is a minute that a hungry child in a marginalized zip code goes without a meal. It is time to move past your outdated mindset and embrace the progress we are trying to build. Kennedy did not look up. He just kept cleaning his glasses with a handkerchief that had seen better days. Progress. That is a really big word for a Thursday morning, is it not? But I am just a simple man, and sometimes these big fancy concepts get a little tangled in my head. Maybe you can help me understand something, since you are the expert on humanity and justice. Is it considered progress to pay a mother into falsely claiming that her child has a neurological condition just to get a check from the government? The room went entirely silent, the air suddenly heavy enough to weigh down the entire room. AOC's pen stopped mid-air, her eyes narrowing into slits as she glared at the man from Louisiana. I have no idea what kind of conspiracy theory rabbit hole you have fallen down this time, Senator. If you have a point, make it. Otherwise, stop wasting the taxpayers' time with these baseless, inflammatory riddles. Kennedy finally looked up, a small, polite smile playing on his lips that did not reach his eyes. Oh, it is no riddle, and I am sure it is not baseless, seeing as I am looking at the incident reports from the beautiful state of Minnesota. You see, some folks went to the state Medicaid department and said they wanted taxpayer money, state and federal money, to feed the impoverished. And these entities, they got the money, and then they just misappropriated it. But they were smart about it to cover their tracks. They went to restaurants and asked for fictitious invoices, claiming they fed 100 people they never even saw. They told those restaurant owners, "Help me misdirect the money, and I will route some of the cash back to you." Now tell me, Congresswoman, does that sound like social justice to you, or just a good old-fashioned misallocation of funds? AOC scoffed, her voice rising to that familiar sharp pitch used for 30-second viral clips. Every system has bad actors, Senator, and you know that. To use a handful of administrative errors to discredit an entire movement for equity is beneath the dignity of this chamber. You are attacking the very idea of helping people, because you are obsessed with policing the underprivileged. Kennedy nodded slowly, leaning into the microphone until his voice was a low, steady rumble. Administrative errors. That is a fancy way to describe what happened next, because according to these reports, it got a whole lot more troubling than a fake sandwich invoice. I am looking at reports of people going to the Medicaid department, asking for money to provide services to autistic children. They got the money, and then, to maximize the fruits of their operation, they went to families and asked, "Do you have children?" When the families said yes, these individuals did not ask about their health. They asked, "Are your children autistic?" And when the parents said no, these people did not stop there. They asked, "Would you agree to sign paperwork to say they are autistic if we route some of the money back to you?" AOC's face paled for a fraction of a second, before she masked it with a look of practiced revolutionary anger. "This is completely unacceptable. Even for you, Senator. You are exploiting the struggles of families with disabilities to score political points against this administration. I will not sit here and listen to you demonize parents who are struggling in a failing system. The real issue is the lack of funding that forces people into these desperate situations." Kennedy stood up, his shadow looming over the bench like a coming storm. "Desperate? Mom, we are not talking about a mother taking a loaf of bread to feed a hungry baby. We are talking about a coordinated effort to turn a child's mental health into a deceptive cash machine. You talk about human rights, and you talk about dignity. But here you are defending a system that encourages parents to brand their own children as disabled, just to grease the palms of the political establishment. Is that your definition of social justice? Because to the folks listening at home, it looks like you are just subsidizing the moral decline of our country. The silence in Senate Hearing Room 216 was no longer empty. It was heavy, thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the cold metallic feeling of an ambush. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sat behind the mahogany bench like a queen awaiting a peasant's plea. Her eyes were fixed on the man from Louisiana, waiting for him to stumble over his own words. But Senator Kennedy was not stumbling. He was a fisherman, and he had just felt the first faint tug on the line. He did not pull back. He gave the line more slack. "Now, Alexandria, I am just trying to get my bearings here. I am a simple man, and I like to keep things in plain English, so the folks back home do not need a lawyer to translate. I want to ask you a very basic question, one that I think even a child could answer. Do you think people who misappropriate taxpayer money, money meant to feed the hungry and help the impoverished, should be prosecuted?" AOC leaned into the microphone, her voice dripping with the kind of forced patience you use with a toddler. "Senator, as I have stated repeatedly, our focus should be on the systemic failures that create poverty in the first place. But of course, any person who violates the law should face the appropriate legal channels. However, I find it deeply troubling that you are obsessing over individual instances of deception, while ignoring the structural imbalances of our economy." Kennedy nodded slowly, as if he were actually considering her words. "Structural imbalances. That is a real fancy term. It sounds like something you would pay a lot of tuition money to learn at an Ivy League school. But let us talk about a different kind of imbalance, the kind where a mother in Minnesota cannot get help because the pot is empty. Because, according to this report right here, some folks went to the state Medicaid department. They said they wanted state taxpayer money and federal taxpayer money to feed the poor. And they got the money, and then they simply misappropriated it." AOC's smirk did not vanish, but it tightened at the corners. "Senator, I am not a prosecutor for the state of Minnesota. If there were administrative errors or minor discrepancies in a local program, that is a matter for local authorities. It is not a reason to hold up a multi-billion-dollar national relief package. These minor discrepancies you are talking about involved restaurant owners being asked to sign fake invoices. The individuals told them, 'Just sign right here and say you fed 100 people today.' They told them, 'You are not actually going to feed anyone. You are just going to help me redirect the money, and I will route some of that cash back to you.' Now, Alexandria, do you think those restaurant operators should be prosecuted? I think that if laws were violated, they should be investigated, regardless of the political narrative you are trying to construct. But let us be honest about what you are doing here, Senator. You are cherry-picking cases from a specific community in Minnesota to stoke racial resentment. You are targeting immigrant-led organizations because they do not fit your vision of what an American looks like. This is not about deception. It is about your discomfort with a changing America. The room seemed to shrink as Kennedy leaned forward, his voice dropping to a low, steady rumble. Is that right? Is that what this is about? Because I did not mention a single soul's skin color or where they were born, I mentioned individuals taking funds. I mentioned people who looked at a hungry child and saw a profit margin. And I want to know this. Does the ethnicity of a person make the money they took any less missing? Does it make the taxpayer who worked 60 hours a week to pay for that deception feel any better? You are using the demographic card as a shield for the political establishment, and it is a really flimsy shield when you look at what happened next. AOC's eyes flashed with a cold, desperate fire. I will not be lectured on morality by a man who supports policies that separate families. This line of questioning is a transparent attempt to demonize the very people our programs are designed to uplift. Uplift? Is that what you call the situation involving autistic children? Because I am looking at reports of people going to the Medicaid department, asking for money to provide services to children with disabilities. They got the taxpayer money, and then to maximize the fruits of their operation, they went to families and asked, "Do you have kids?" And when the parents said yes, these individuals asked, "Are your children autistic?" And when the parents said no, the individuals did not walk away. They asked, "Would you agree to sign paperwork to say they are autistic if we route some of the money back to you?" AOC opened her mouth, but for a split second, no sound came out. The arrogance was still there, but it was being held up by nothing but air. Senator, these are unverified allegations designed to create a spectacle. Spectacle? These are facts. These are families being paid to brand their own children with a disability, just to grease the palms of an establishment operative. And you are sitting there telling me that we should not prosecute these families because of their ethnicity? I am saying that the ethnicity of these people should not be a weapon in your hands. Not a bit. Well, I am glad we finally agree on something, because I think they should all face justice. But it seems to me that the only structural imbalance happening here is the way you and your friends in the establishment are protecting this questionable activity. You are so busy looking for subtle signals that you cannot hear the giant vacuum cleaner sucking the bank accounts of the American people dry. The real issue is that you want to give these same people more money. You want to expand the safety net, so the operators have a bigger net to catch their funds in. And you call that progress? I call it a massive misappropriation, Alexandria. And the American people are tired of being the ones who foot the bill. The gold fountain pen in AOC's hand was trembling now, a tiny tremor that the cameras did not miss. The trap was not just set. The consequences were starting to sink in, and the Louisiana senator was just getting warmed up. The air in room 216 had changed. It was not just heavy anymore. It was incredibly tense for anyone carrying a specific political letter next to their name. The media observers in the back row had stopped checking their social feeds. They were staring at Kennedy like he was holding a live, unpredictable element with the safety off. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not smirking anymore. She was vibrating with a controlled, elitist fury, her knuckles white as she gripped that gold pen. The senator from Louisiana leaned back, his eyes twinkling with the steady calm of a man who had seen this scenario before and knew exactly how it ended. Now, Alexandria, I want to move past the individuals for a moment I want to talk about those vibrant community pillars you always praise in your online threads. You know, those small businesses you claim are the beating heart of the marginalized economy. Because according to these reports, some of those hearts have a really nasty case of rot. AOC slammed her hand onto the desk, the sound echoing loudly through the silent chamber. Senator, I will not sit here and allow you to smear hard-working immigrant entrepreneurs who are the backbone of this country. These businesses struggled through a global health crisis while your party did nothing but protect corporate interests. You are attacking the very people who are trying to rebuild their lives in a system designed to see them fail. Kennedy did not blink. He just tilted his head, looking at her like a curious scientist observing a particularly loud lab subject. Struggling, you say? Well now, I suppose taking from the taxpayer is one way to handle a liquidity crisis. Let us look at how these entrepreneurs handled their business in Minnesota. They did not just take the money and run. They built a factory of fabrications. They went to local restaurants, establishments you would call cornerstones of the community, and they did not go there for the lunch special. They went there with a proposition straight out of a cinematic script. The report says they sat down with these owners and laid it all out. They said, I need a piece of paper, son. I need a fictitious invoice that says, you fed 100 people today. I need you to testify on paper that 100 hungry souls walked through those doors and left with full bellies. But here is the critical part. The real progressive twist. They told those owners, you are not actually going to cook a single grain of rice. You are not going to feed a single soul. You are just going to help me redirect the money from the government, and I will route a nice stack of that cash back to you for your trouble. Now, Alexandria, in your world of equity and social justice, what do we call a business that gets paid to feed non-existent people? AOC's eyes darted toward the cameras, her brain clearly scrambling to find a way to pivot. This is a gross oversimplification of complex socio-economic survival strategies. You are ignoring the systemic undercapitalization that forces these businesses to seek alternative revenue streams. We are talking about equity-driven economic recovery, and you are focused on isolated bookkeeping discrepancies. Kennedy let out a long, slow whistle that cut through her jargon like a hot knife through butter. Socio-economic survival strategies? Is that the new academic term for an unethical deal? Where I come from, when you take money for work you did not do and then pay off a witness to lie about it, we call that a major offense. We call it a coordinated scheme. And the bookkeeping discrepancy you are talking about is the sound of the American taxpayer being bled dry by the people you call community leaders. You see, citizens, this is how the process actually works in the political establishment. It is not just one person with a fast hand. It is an entire ecosystem of complicity. The advocates get the grant money. The community businesses provide the fake paperwork, and the politicians, like the lady sitting across from me, provide the cover by calling it all humanitarian aid. It is a beautiful little machine, is it not? A financial routing operation dressed up in the robes of compassion. AOC leaned forward, her voice rising to that sharp lecturing tone that has become the soundtrack of the coastal elite. You are criminalizing the very concept of community support. These restaurants provide jobs. They provide a sense of belonging. You are trying to destroy the social fabric of Minnesota because you cannot stand to see a system that does not benefit your wealthiest donors. Kennedy's expression went from approachable to freezing in a heartbeat. Jobs? What jobs, Alexandria? The job of writing a fake invoice? The job of lying to a federal auditor? The people of this country are not wealthiest donors. They are plumbers and nurses and truck drivers who are working 60 hours a week. They are the ones paying for those non-existent meals. They are the ones paying for the routed cash you are so desperate to defend. And why are they doing it? because they were told their money was going to feed the impoverished, but the impoverished did not get a sandwich. The community pillars got routed cash, and the advocates got a new vehicle. The inconsistency is so thick you could clog a drain with it. You stand here and preach about the dignity of work, while you protect people who treat deception like a retirement fund. You talk about accountability for everyone, except the people who vote for your specific agenda. Let me ask you something else. Since you are so fond of these survival strategies, do you think the restaurant owners who signed those fake invoices should face legal consequences? Or does their marginalized status give them a free pass to take from the Treasury? AOC's mouth opened and closed, the practiced slogans finally failing her. I think that the legal system should consider the context of systemic imbalances. Kennedy chuckled, a dry, rattling sound that lacked any amusement. Context. Right. In other words, if they vote for you, it is a survival strategy. If they do not, it is a crime. The American people see through the fog, Alexandria. They see a system where compassion is just a code word for questionable operations. They see a community economy that is actually a network of operators, and they see you standing there holding the bag for every single one of them. The non-existent meals are over, the invoices are being audited, and the establishment's favorite restaurant is about to lose its license. The room was so quiet you could hear the heartbeat of the political establishment skip a beat. AOC sat there, her backbone of the economy argument shattered into a million pieces of fraudulent paper, and the senator was just getting ready to move on to the children. The restaurant situation was just an appetizer for the establishment. It was just the cost of doing business in a system that rewards questionable actions and punishes the honest. But what happens when the deception is not just taking dollars, but taking the very innocence and future of a child? Senator John Kennedy casually tossed the file on the restaurant invoices onto the desk. It landed with a dull thud, dismissing the community pillars as the common operators they were. He did not boast, he did not smile. Instead, he reached into his battered briefcase and pulled out a different folder. This one was a dark, solid red. The air in Senate Hearing Room 216 suddenly felt like it had been sucked through a vacuum. The frantic typing of the press corps slowed to a halt. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez watched the red folder emerge, her posture stiffening as the bravado began to leak out of her designer suit. "We have talked about the fake meals, Alexandria," Kennedy began, his voice dropping to a low, steady whisper that commanded absolute silence. "We have established that your progressive safety net is funding non-existent kitchens and routing schemes. But I want to talk about something else. Now, I want to talk about the vulnerable populations you claim to defend so fiercely. I want to talk about the children." AOC's chin tilted up defensively, her eyes flashing with a desperate attempt to reclaim the moral high ground. "The children are exactly why we need this funding, Senator. They are the victims of a ruthless economic structure that denies them basic health care and educational equity." Kennedy's eyes locked onto hers, cold and unyielding as a steel trap. "Is that so? Well, let us see how your system provides that health care." He opened the red folder, smoothing out the pages with deliberate, agonizing slowness. Because, according to the Department of Justice, these same individuals from Minnesota had another operation going. They went to the Medicaid department and said, "I need state taxpayer money and federal taxpayer money to provide services to autistic children." Now that sounds like a noble cause, does it not? Helping children with special needs. It is the kind of thing that gets you a standing ovation on late-night television. But the operators did not have any autistic children to treat, so they had to go out and manufacture some. AOC's brow furrowed, genuine confusion mixing with the rising panic in her chest. "Manufacture? What are you talking about?" Kennedy leaned into the microphone, every word landing like a hammer blow on an anvil. I mean, they went out into these communities, your marginalized communities, and they went looking. They went to some families and said, "Do you have children?" And some of the families said, "Yes, we have kids." And the operators said, "Are your children autistic?" And the parents said, "Well, no." Now, a decent human being would apologize for the intrusion, walk away. But your community advocates did not do that. Instead, they looked at those healthy, normal children, and they saw a dollar sign. The operator said, "Well, would you agree to sign paperwork to say they are autistic if we route some of the money back to you?" A collective intake of breath rippled through the hearing room. The silence that followed was so absolute, it was deafening. AOC's jaw dropped. The gold-nibbed pen slipped from her fingers, clattering loudly onto the polished wood of the bench. For the first time in her highly publicized political career, she was entirely, utterly speechless. "Let that sink in for a moment, Alexandria," Kennedy whispered, making his point undeniable. They asked parents to put a permanent medical diagnosis of autism on their perfectly healthy children. They asked them to brand their kids with a disability. And why? For a cut of the federal grant money. For a routed payment funded by the American taxpayer. AOC's face flushed a deep, panicked crimson as she scrambled to grab her microphone. That is an extreme aberration, and if it is true, it is a tragic reflection of the economic hardship these families are facing. Do you know how desperate a mother must be to agree to something like that? It is the crushing weight of poverty, the lack of a living wage that forces people into these impossible moral dilemmas. You are blaming the victims of a skewed economy. Kennedy stood up, placing his hand flat onto the red folder. Victims? You are calling the people who compromised their own children's medical records victims? Are you sitting there, under oath, trying to justify the commercialization of a child's mental health? Are you actually defending the act of leveraging a child's future and honor to drain our tax dollars? This is not about a living wage, Congresswoman. This is about moral emptiness. This is about a system you built that is so bloated, so flawed, and so eager to hand out cash that it turned unethical practices into a viable business model. Do not talk to me about desperation. A desperate mother takes basic necessities. She does not sign a government document swearing her child has a neurological disorder so she can split a Medicaid check with a deceptive operator. AOC was gripping the edges of her desk, her knuckles turning white as she desperately tried to weave a new narrative. You are stripping away the context of systemic inequality. When the government fails to provide a universal basic income, when health care is commodified, the marginalized are forced to navigate the system in whatever way they can. This is a cry for help, an indictment of the economic system, not a reason to cut assistance programs. Kennedy's response was sharp, direct, and entirely devoid of amusement. An indictment of the economic system? No, Mom. This is an indictment of the political establishment. This is the direct result of a bureaucratic structure that hands out billions of dollars with zero accountability. You have created a problematic situation. You have built an industry where questionable diagnoses are profitable and where healthy children are just wasted inventory. Think about what you are defending. Think about that child 5 or 10 years from now. He goes to apply for a job, or join the service, or get life insurance, and his permanent federal record says he has severe autism. Why? Because his parents wanted a few extra dollars from your compassionate government programs, and the politicians who authorized the checks looked the other way, because it fit their narrative of helping the needy. You are not protecting the vulnerable, Alexandria. You are funding their exploitation. You are paying operators to utilize children for federal grants. AOC's chest was heaving, her eyes darting wildly around the room, searching for a friendly face among the press corps, but the reporters were just staring at her, their cameras capturing the exact moment her ideological framework collapsed. This is an orchestrated defamation campaign, she stammered, her voice shaking, the commanding tone completely shattered. You are twisting the pain of marginalized communities to protect the wealth of the elite. We need more oversight, yes, but we cannot abandon the safety net. Kennedy slowly sat back down, shaking his head with a look of profound disappointment. Oversight. That is the magic word, is it not? When the questionable activity gets exposed, you just demand more money to hire more bureaucrats to watch the bureaucrats. But the oversight never comes. The checks just keep getting written, and the children keep getting compromised. You sit up there and lecture the American people about their advantages. You call them prejudiced when they question where their tax dollars are going. Well, now they know. Their money is not buying school lunches or building community centers. Their money is buying fake diagnoses. It is buying the compliance of parents who have been trained by your system to view their own family members as a financial ticket. The compassion of the left has a price tag, Congresswoman, and today we found out it is paid for with the dignity of children. The senator from Louisiana closed the red folder. The sound of the cardboard snapping shut echoed like a judge's gavel in the silent room. AOC stared at the folder, her arguments neutralized, her progressive shield shattered into a million pieces. She was struggling politically on live television. But Kennedy was not finished. He had not even brought out the most significant file yet. The compassion of the extreme political left is nothing more than an illusionist's trick. They keep your eyes glued to their empathetic words, while their other hand is busy taking your resources. But what happens when the trick is finally exposed? What happens when a highly favored representative of the establishment is caught defending the indefensible? They do not apologize, citizens. They pivot. They find a bigger, louder crisis, and they try to redirect the entire conversation. In Senate Hearing Room 216, the air was practically vibrating with tension. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was backed into a corner, losing political capital rapidly over the revelation of the autism discrepancies. The media section was dead silent, their cameras capturing the exact moment her moral high ground collapsed into a sinkhole. She needed an escape route, and she needed it immediately. She inhaled sharply, her face morphing from panicked realization back to the practiced theatrical outrage that had made her famous. She slammed her palm onto the mahogany desk, a sharp, loud crack that shattered the silence of the chamber. Enough, Senator Kennedy. I have sat here and listened to you weaponize isolated administrative errors to attack the very dignity of the working class. You are deliberately focusing on a few bad actors in Minnesota to avoid talking about the real systemic hardship happening in this country. If you care so much about children and families, why are we not talking about the border? Why are we not talking about the hundreds of thousands of immigrants who are being abandoned and terrorized by the exclusionary policies your party supports? People are fleeing hardship, fleeing economic devastation, and arriving at our doorsteps, seeking the American dream. And your side of the aisle wants to place them in containment facilities and deny them basic human rights. Our immigration system is collapsing under the weight of your manufactured strictness. And you want to sit here and count pennies from a Medicaid ledger? This is not oversight, Senator. This is a distraction from your own lack of empathy. AOC stared directly into the broadcasting camera lens, her eyes wide and glistening, playing the role of the righteous advocate to absolute perfection. It was her greatest move, the ultimate progressive pivot when you get caught defending the establishment. Just raise your voice about exclusion and point at the southern border. She genuinely thought she had flipped the script. She thought she had dragged John Kennedy out of the details of a financial scandal and into a sweeping philosophical debate about human rights, where the media would happily support her narrative. She had no idea. She had just handed the senator the keys to the entire argument. Kennedy did not object. He did not strike his gavel or complain that she was dodging the question. He just sat there, pulling that old wrinkled handkerchief from his pocket and slowly cleaning his glasses. He slipped the glasses back onto his face, peering at her with a gentle yet unwavering smile. It was the smile of a seasoned debater, watching an opponent enthusiastically lock themselves inside a logical trap. The border? Well now, Alexandria, that is a mighty fascinating pivot. You want to talk about immigration? You want to talk about the American dream and the folks seeking a better life? I think that is a spectacular idea. Let us leave Minnesota behind for a minute and take a trip to Washington, D.C. Let us talk about the Department of Homeland Security. Let us talk about USCIS, the agency in charge of granting that American dream you are so worried about. And specifically, let us talk about a good associate of yours, the man running that agency. Let us talk about Mr. Joseph Edlow. The name dropped like a heavy weight onto the center of the table. AOC's theatrical outrage froze instantly, replaced by a sudden, sharp look of genuine caution. Mr. Edlow is a dedicated public servant. He is doing everything in his power to manage an unprecedented humanitarian situation with a severely underfunded agency. Kennedy chuckled, tapping his finger against a fresh stack of documents he had pulled from his battered briefcase. A dedicated public servant. That is a beautiful sentiment, Mom, but it does not quite match the paperwork I have right here. Because, according to this, your dedicated public servant is not managing a situation. He is running a coercive operation. I have records here indicating that at least 300,000 people have applied to USCIS for legal status. 300,000 folks from 90 different countries who followed the rules. They filled out the forms, and most importantly, they paid the fees to the United States government. They handed over their hard-earned money, expecting a service in return. But do you know what Joseph Edlow did with those applications, Congresswoman? He did not hire more staff. He did not streamline the process. He issued a policy to simply sit on them. He ordered his agency to take their money, put it in the bank, and do absolutely nothing. AOC's hands gripped the edge of the desk, her knuckles turning bone white as she realized the trap she had just walked into. That is a gross mischaracterization of the immigration processing. The agency is prioritizing rigorous evaluation to ensure national security. You cannot rush the process when the safety of the American people is at stake. Mr. Edlow is implementing necessary security protocols that your own party has demanded for years. Kennedy leaned forward, the approachable charm evaporating into a cold, hard stare. Evaluation? Security? Protocols? You are telling me that taking money from immigrants and throwing their paperwork in the disposal is a security protocol? You are telling me that the political establishment is just trying to keep us safe? Because that is a very interesting defense, coming from someone who just spent the last 10 minutes calling me exclusionary. You wanted to talk about hardship, Alexandria. You wanted to talk about the American dream being denied. Well, here it is. It is not being denied by conservatives. It is being denied by a radical administrator who takes their cash and leaves them in the shadows. He is running a federal holding operation under the guise of an administrative backlog, and he is doing it right under the nose of Secretary Noem. AOC was breathing heavily now, the polished veneer of the academic elite completely stripped away. She had tried to change the subject to save herself, but she had only dug a deeper hole. By bringing up immigration, she had given Kennedy the exact opening he needed to elevate the issue from state-level discrepancies to a federal operation. This is a targeted inquiry, Senator. You are attacking the integrity of our federal institutions to distract from the fact that you have no solutions. We are evaluating these people to protect the public, and you are trying to turn it into a scandal." Kennedy did not raise his voice, but his words hit with the force of a freight train. Protect the public. Are you absolutely sure you want to use the word protect, Mom? Because if Joseph Edlow is so focused on evaluation to keep the American people safe, then I have one final question for you. The room held its breath. The logical trap was fully locked, and the senator was ready for the decisive point. The establishment wants you to believe that the federal government is just slow. They want you to think it is just a giant, clumsy entity that simply cannot get out of its own way. But that is the greatest misdirection the political elite ever presented to the American public. The hidden bureaucracy is not incompetent. It is a highly efficient, ruthlessly calculated machine designed to extract resources and consolidate influence while hiding behind the excuse of bureaucratic red tape. And today, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was about to get a guided tour of the engine room. She thought she had successfully changed the subject by bringing up the border discussion. She thought that by wrapping herself in the flag of immigration reform, she could escape the focus on the Medicaid operations in Minnesota. But Senator John Kennedy had been waiting for her to open that exact door. He did not just have his foot in the door. He had the blueprints to the entire questionable building. 300,000. Alexandria, Kennedy said, his voice cutting through the heavy air of hearing room 216 like a sharpened blade. That is the conservative estimate of the folks we are talking about. At least 300,000 people abroad, and probably twice that when you consider the parties already in the United States. These are people who went to the Department of Homeland Security seeking some kind of permanent or semi-permanent status. They filled out the endless forms, they navigated through the requirements, and, most importantly, they paid their hard-earned money to USCIS. AOC's posture remained rigid, but the assertive tilt of her chin began to falter. "And what did they get for their money, Congresswoman?" Kennedy asked, leaning forward so that his face was illuminated by the harsh glare of the committee desk lamp. "Did they get a service? Did they get a determination? Did they even get a polite letter, saying the agency was running a little behind schedule? No, they did not, because Joseph Edlow, the man running USCIS, came up with a very special policy. He decided that the agency was just going to take their money and then sit on their applications. He did not put them in a queue to be processed. He put them in the disposal. The media section at the back of the room was completely paralyzed. The reporters who usually spent these hearings drafting critical messages about conservative politicians were staring at Kennedy with their mouths slightly open. AOC grabbed her microphone, her knuckles turning white from the sheer force of her grip. "That is a completely baseless and inflammatory accusation. USCIS is a critically underfunded agency dealing with an unprecedented backlog of global movement. To suggest that a dedicated public servant like Joseph Edlow is intentionally ignoring applications is a severe partisan mischaracterization. They are not throwing applications in the disposal. They are triaging a systemic issue that your party refused to fund." Kennedy did not even blink. He reached into the depths of his battered leather briefcase and pulled out a single, neatly folded sheet of official government paper. He did not wave it around like a prop. He held it gently, respectfully, like an investigator holding a piece of crucial physical evidence. "A partisan mischaracterization," Kennedy mused, his Louisiana drawl stretching the words out until they sounded almost melodic. "Well, if it is a mischaracterization, it seems Mr. Edlow is the one holding the pen, because I have a copy of the internal memorandum right here." AOC's eyes locked onto the piece of paper, and for a fleeting second, the mask of the fearless progressive advocate completely shattered. Raw, unadulterated panic flashed across her face. This memorandum explicitly states that the agency is intentionally halting the processing of these people. It is not a funding issue, And it is not a triage strategy. It is a directive to take the cash and provide absolutely nothing in return. If a mechanic took your money and then sat on his toolbox instead of fixing your vehicle, authorities would charge him for taking funds under false pretenses. But when the establishment does it to 300,000 people, you call it triaging a systemic issue. And it does not stop with Joseph Edlow. This kind of massive, coordinated holding operation does not happen in a vacuum. Who is his superior? Alexandria. Who does Mr. Edlow report to? He reports directly to Secretary Noem. Secretary Noem is fully aware of the general tenor of this policy, and the issue goes even further than the federal desk. We have reports that Secretary Rubio is involved as well when it comes to the state level. This is a coordinated effort from the top down. It is a legalized stalling machine operating in the shadows of the very agency you claim is saving lives. They are requesting fees from immigrants, securing the cash, and leaving these people in permanent legal uncertainty. AOC's chest heaved as she desperately searched for a lifeline in the sea of devastating facts. She could not deny the existence of the memo, and she could not defend the operation. She had to pivot again, and she had to use the only argument the establishment had left when cornered on immigration. She had to invoke the highly regarded concept of national security. "You are deliberately misinterpreting standard operating procedures," AOC shouted, her voice echoing shrilly against the wood-paneled walls. "This is not about taking money and doing nothing. USCIS is deliberately slowing evaluation because of the huge backlog and the absolute necessity of strict vetting. Under this administration, we are committed to ensuring that every single applicant is thoroughly screened. We cannot process these files blindly when national security is at stake. The delay you are so quick to criticize is actually the sound of a responsible government doing its job to protect the nation. You cannot have it both ways, Senator. You cannot demand secure boundaries and then complain when the agency takes the necessary time to properly vet the people entering our country." Kennedy slowly lowered the memorandum back onto his desk. He looked at her with a mix of understanding and profound disappointment. She had done exactly what he expected her to do. She had walked right past the warning signs, ignored the logical trap, and stepped directly onto the focal point. She had used the word vetting. She had invoked the concept of protecting the public to justify the establishment's operations. And in doing so, she had set the stage for the most devastating counter-argument in the history of the Senate Judiciary Committee. There is a word the political insiders love to use when they are caught in questionable activities. They call it protocol. They call it procedure. And when they are truly cornered, when the walls are closing in and the facts are staring them right in the face, they call it vetting. It is the ultimate bureaucratic shield. It is a word designed to make inefficiency look like diligence and to make operational failure look like national security. But in Senate Hearing Room 216, that shield was about to be shattered into a million jagged pieces. Vetting, Senator John Kennedy repeated the word, rolling it around in his mouth like a piece of bitter fruit. He did not shout. He did not raise his voice to match the frantic pitch of the Congresswoman sitting above him. He stated it quietly, and that quietness was infinitely more powerful than a scream. Vetting. Kennedy slowly took off his glasses, folding the earpieces with a deliberate, agonizing calm. He placed them gently on the desk, right next to the damning Department of Homeland Security memorandum. The folksy, grandfatherly charm was entirely gone. In its place was the grim, unforgiving stare of a seasoned official who had just heard enough misdirections for one lifetime. "You want to sit in that expensive chair, wearing that tailored suit, and talk to me about vetting? You want to look into these cameras and tell the American people that Joseph Edlow is sitting on 300,000 applications because he is meticulously checking every single background? You want to claim that he is taking their money and discarding their paperwork because he is so deeply, passionately concerned about the safety of the nation? Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gripped her microphone, her knuckles white, her chest heaving as she tried to maintain her assertive posture. Yes, Senator. That is exactly what a responsible administration does. We do not cut corners when it comes to national security, and we will not be pressured into rushing a process that keeps Americans safe. Kennedy nodded. A slow, methodical movement that sent a chill down the spine of every reporter in the room. National security. Keeping Americans safe. Let us examine that security. Alexandria, let us take a walk outside this beautiful air-conditioned building. Let us go down the street, right here in Washington, D.C. Let us talk about a young woman who put on a uniform to actually serve this country, instead of just talking about it on television. Let us talk about the woman from the National Guard. AOC blinked. The aggressive revolutionary fire in her eyes suddenly dimmed into a flicker of genuine confusion. She did not know the name. She did not know the story. To certain progressive circles, the military is often just a budgetary line item, a point to be debated, depending on the daily talking points. They often do not focus on the individual faces. They do not fully acknowledge the personal sacrifices. You do not know who I am talking about, do you? Kennedy asked, his voice dripping with a sorrowful tone. You are so busy memorizing the latest academic buzzwords and practicing your statements for the cameras that you do not even review the local incident reports. A woman in the National Guard tragically lost her life. She was fatally harmed on the streets of our nation's capital, right in the shadow of these monuments. And do you know who was responsible, Congresswoman? She was harmed by an individual who walked right through this rigorous vetting process you are so fiercely defending. The silence in the hearing room was no longer just heavy. It was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens during a moment of profound realization. The frantic clicking of the camera shutters from the press corps stopped entirely. The journalists were frozen, their lenses aimed at the high bench, capturing a moment of political accountability that could never be spun or edited away. He did not sneak in through the dead of night, Alexandria. He was processed by your system. He was handled by the very agencies you claim are working overtime to keep us safe. The same agencies that are apparently too busy holding cash from legal applicants to actually track down the individuals with concerning records crossing our borders. Where was your thorough screening then? Where was Joseph Edlow's meticulous attention to detail when that individual was allowed to roam our streets? Where was the systemic compassion when that young woman was fighting for her last moments on the concrete? AOC did not move. The gold-nibbed fountain pen finally slipped from her trembling fingers. It rolled off the edge of the mahogany desk and hit the carpet with a dull, distinct thud. She did not reach for it. She did not place her hands on the table. She did not raise her voice about systemic issues or the severity of conservative boundary policies. Her lips trembled, parting slightly. But the air in her lungs refused to turn into sound. The heavy, undeniable weight of a human consequence had just crashed through her theoretical ceiling, fundamentally challenging her political concepts. Kennedy leaned forward, bracing his hands on the desk, delivering the final focal point. I will tell you where your vetting was. It was non-existent, because Joseph Edlow and Secretary Noem were sitting in their plush offices, hiding behind a mountain of unprocessed paperwork, collecting a government paycheck. They do not sit on those files for security. They sit on them out of sheer operational inability. They sit on them because the political establishment does not prioritize the consequences of its open border philosophy. They let individuals with concerning records bypass the system to impact American lives. And then they hide behind the word vetting when the tragic consequences occur. You stand up there and lecture me about compassion. You preach about the strictness of the conservatives. but your compassion is marked by American tragedies. That young woman took an oath to defend this nation. She put her life on the line for the very freedoms that allow you to sit in that chair. And this nation's administrative structure failed her. Your system failed her. Your administrative priorities directly led to this outcome. AOC's eyes widened, filling with a panicked moisture that the camera zoomed in on with ruthless precision. She looked to her left, then to her right, seeking a supportive voice from her staff, from the committee chairman, from anyone, but there was no one left to intervene. Her staff was staring at their documents. The representatives on the committee were suddenly very interested in the blank pages of their notepads. She was completely, utterly alone on the debating floor she had chosen. You cannot blame this on a lack of funding, Congresswoman. You cannot blame this on a broken economic structure. This is the direct result of a government operation that has decided the American citizen is the last priority on the list. You take money from the applicants, you risk the safety of the citizens, and you disregard the dignity of the children. And you have the absolute nerve to call it progress. The vetting process is not a shield to protect America. It is a misdirection to protect the establishment. And the terrible price of that misdirection was paid by a woman in a National Guard uniform. While you sat here complaining about my tone, Senator Kennedy slowly picked up his glasses and slid them back onto his face. The seasoned representative had spoken, the core arguments had struck, and the highly favored figure of the progressive movement was left without a valid defense. Her moral positioning was severely challenged by the brutal, undeniable reality of the outcomes. There is a specific kind of silence that follows a major political shift. It is not peaceful. It is the overwhelming, undeniable silence of a narrative being replaced by the immense weight of the truth. Welcome to the final act in the ultimate arena, citizens. Today, we did not just listen to a congressional debate. We witnessed the absolute dismantling of the progressive movement's primary spokesperson. Senate Hearing Room 216 was completely paralyzed. The frantic, continuous clicking of the mainstream media's cameras had ceased entirely. The reporters sat frozen in their chairs, staring at the high bench with their mouths slightly open, their pens hovering uselessly over their notepads. They had come here today to write the political conclusion of a Southern conservative. They had pre-written their headlines about how Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was going to instruct Senator John Kennedy on the virtues of compassion. Instead, they were watching her struggle in the undeniable, concerning reality of her own favored policies. She did not speak. She did not reach for the microphone. Her expensive gold-nibbed fountain pen still lay abandoned on the carpet, a forgotten accessory in the face of raw, unvarnished facts. The only sound left in the grand wood-paneled chamber was the low mechanical hum of the air-conditioning unit. It was a cold, indifferent sound, much like the bureaucratic machine she had spent the afternoon trying to defend. AOC stared blankly at the empty space on her desk, her revolutionary bravado entirely neutralized. Her shoulders were slumped, the sharp lines of her designer blazer suddenly looking too big for her. She had no snappy slogans left to chant for the viral clips. She had no accusations of exclusion, bias, or systemic oppression left to hurl at the other side of the aisle. The tragic loss of a National Guard service member had permanently overshadowed her talking points. The exploitation of autistic children had severely damaged her claims of moral superiority. Senator John Kennedy did not boast. He did not pound his fist on the table, and he did not demand an apology. He simply looked at the Congresswoman with a profound, sorrowful expression. "You do not have anything left to say, do you, Alexandria?" His voice was soft, carrying a heavy, mournful cadence that echoed through the silent room like a tolling bell. "For the first time since you arrived in Washington with your grand ideas, you are entirely out of words. And honestly, Mom, maybe that is exactly what this country needs right now. Maybe it is time for the politicians who created this spectacular situation to sit quietly and listen to the consequences they have caused. Kennedy slowly reached out and placed his hand flat on top of the ME1760 file. You came in here today to lecture me about humanity. You wanted to preach to the American people about the virtues of your progressive vision and how we need to expand the safety net. But let us look at the actual harvest of your compassion. Let us look at what your policies have bought with the sweat, the tears, and the toil of the American working class. Taxpayer money. Money that was meant to feed the truly desperate is being taken by community operators running non-existent kitchens in Minnesota. They are writing fake invoices and trading favors, while the impoverished stay hungry. The very future and dignity of our children are being treated like commodities on the open market. Parents are being actively compensated to brand their healthy kids with a permanent mental designation, all to grease the wheels of your massive Medicaid operation. And when we look beyond the borders of that beautiful state, the issue only deepens. You have built a Department of Homeland Security that operates like a massive collection entity. They take the hard-earned money of 300,000 immigrants, and then they discard their applications. They hold the cash to fund their own bloated agencies, while leaving those people in the shadows. And to cover it all up, they hide behind the highly regarded duty of vetting. But we know the absolute truth about that vetting now, do we not? The American people know that your rigorous screening process is a deeply flawed illusion. The memory of a brave woman in a National Guard uniform is permanently tied to the concrete of this capital city. She was fatally harmed by an individual that your broken system waved right through the front door. And you sit up there wrapped in your designer clothes and your academic arrogance, and you have the absolute audacity to call this progress. You call it equity. You call it humanitarian relief. I call it a failure of everything this constitutional republic stands for. Kennedy slowly pulled his hand away from the microphone. He opened his battered leather briefcase, the brass latches clicking loudly in the quiet room. He picked up the Medicaid operation reports, the red autism file, and the damning USCIS memorandum. He stacked them neatly, one on top of the other, tapping the edges against the desk to align them perfectly. He slid the ME1760 file into the briefcase and snapped it shut. AOC finally looked up, her eyes red, her expression a mix of profound humility and sudden dread. She thought the intense questioning was over. She thought he was packing up to leave her alone with her challenged reputation. But Kennedy paused, resting his hand casually on the handle of his briefcase. He looked past AOC, his eyes seemingly fixed on the unseen forces influencing decisions in the dark shadows of Washington. But you know, Alexandria, as tragic as all of this is, I do not blame you entirely. You are just the loudest voice on the stage. You are just the highly visible figure they put in front of the cameras to keep the American people arguing with each other. Joseph Edlow is just a mid-level administrator following orders from above. Even Secretary Noem is just a manager reading from a pre-written script. They are components on a very complex, very concerning strategic board. Kennedy leaned in close to the microphone one last time, his voice dropping to a serious, investigative whisper. The real question we should be asking ourselves is not how this system got so spectacularly broken. The real question is who ordered it to be structured this way. Who is benefiting from the intentional managed operations of the United States? Who profits when our borders are bypassed, when our treasury is drained, and when our children are turned into medical commodities? Because a system this incredibly concerning does not build itself by accident. It takes planning. Someone is cashing the real check, Congresswoman. Someone is benefiting off the pressure on the middle class. And I promise you, before I conclude my time here, I am going to find out exactly who it is. Senator Kennedy turned his back on the high bench and walked down the center aisle of hearing room 216. He did not look at the press corps. He did not stop to answer questions from the desperate reporters. He just kept walking. A solitary figure of Louisiana resolve, cutting straight through the heart of the political establishment. Behind him, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez remained frozen in her chair, a defeated figure left alone on a changed stage. The hearing was over, but the broader debate has only just begun. The ME 1760 files cracked the door open, exposing the operators of the hidden bureaucracy and their true agenda. But Kennedy's final question is the one that should keep every dedicated citizen seeking answers. Who is engineering these operations? Who is pulling the strings above Joseph Edlow, above Secretary Noem, above the vocal politicians on your television screen? The mainstream media often avoids that question. They are too busy trying to minimize today's revelations and protect their corporate interests. But the questions will continue. The continuous search for the concealed documentation will persist, because the American structure was not altered by accident. It was maneuvered by design. Remain observant. Citizens, trust your understanding, maintain your focus, and never stop seeking the truth behind the establishment.